All
Welcome to
right.
the PaperTrail podcast, episode six. Episode six, right?
Episode six, the number one
Episode
number for
six.
Cote.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yep.
Where everything has a paper trail, so we follow that, and that's how we get our content. Today is a special day.
It's the day.
We've been talking about the man. Is he below? The
The
man
the
below?
the lit the myth, the legend below
The
us.
legend below. We've been talking about him for like the past five episodes. Cote, the man himself, and we got him on.
Dog.
Man,
Hello.
Dude. Hello?
let's
Hello?
yeah.
Yeah.
How did you meet Cote, Grant? How
Bro,
did you I can
first
tell
of
you
all,
he
without Cote, there is no Paper Trail podcast. There's no Pap and Grant without Cote. Honestly, there might not even be a Grant without Cote because his expertise and willingness to help definitely pushed me in a great direction to where this podcast is now today. So dude, it's crazy. I met Cote. I was literally maybe like 6 months into my journey, and I was just on YouTube and I found a David Bombal video with NahamSec, and I joined his server. And I would just go jump in there, do some bug bounty, and then Cote found me actually. Now that I think about it, Cote found me.
Cote doing the work.
I don't even remember. It's been that long. I think it's been over a year.
Yeah.
Cote has
I
found
think
so many people.
I joined a bunch of servers, I think in early 2023 after being what I'm going to call an internet monk in a group chat on Element, which if you don't know, that's Matrix. So this is like a really obscure place. And all that was there was a guy doing C++, plus plus, very good. Like he still like bewilders like what you could do with Vulkan. A guy who's really into math and Haskell.
Dang.
And then there's me who got slowly into a different thing. But eventually I was kind of frustrated with not having any networking. So eventually I just started looking through all of this. I just started going to, I think, Discord.
Hmm.
Was
I
it
don't know if
Discord?
it may have been Discord. I may have searched there too. But I think
Yeah.
Reddit and I think cybersec students may have been the first one. But eventually I joined Hacks Network. Think you ran a I think some kind of giveaway for Nitro for a while.
Yep.
Oh,
And
dang.
that box that I did to get that box is still my favorite box due to the way I got into it or could have gotten into it.
Yeah,
That's
man, you threw me
crazy.
threw me way back on that. So when I first started hacking that, I think I told the story in one of the other episodes, but we had just disbanded from a previous server that I was in. I was helping moderate, and I decided to start my own because the server was a great idea. It was just flooded with a lot of people looking to get into illegal stuff. So I had an idea to start my own, but this time crack down and
Hmm.
and make it more ethical. Um, so I start the server, I throw it up on Discord, and then as soon as I threw it up on Discord, I made an announcement basically saying, free Nitro giveaway. Like I'm giving away free Nitro if anyone can solve this box. And Cole ended up joining with some other people. And was it you, Cole, who solved it? Someone solved it. I just
Yeah, I
remember.
solved it because that was my first ever time having Nitro actually, and the
Okay.
box was a medium Linux box, and at that point in my journey, medium was about the most I could do. Um, but I'd done I think 8 boxes by that point,
Hmm.
and um, that box was the first box like I actually learned a thing, but it wasn't the intention, which was PostScript, and that's a whole rabbit hole. I think I went through a PAP, and the idea is that um, you could run a shell because the image library Python used would load up an interpreter and that had a memory bug. And I seg faulted Python. And when I did that, I was like, what did I just do? And from there, I found a 0 day, not, it was an end day at this point,
Yep.
a bug that's already known, but it was basically an unintended path. And I have to go back and see if it was a vulnerable version because I could have just been doing something really dumb. With the PostScript, it could have just been a really, you know, not really a bug, but ever since then, I got hooked and I stayed in the server pretty much doing boxes for that whole summer, I think.
Yep. Yep.
I had
Dude.
really unnatural energy levels at that
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, that was an interesting box because yes, for like privilege escalation, you had to look for a vulnerable library, which is what Cote ended up finding, and that was related to Python. And so the seg fault that Cote mentioned is funny. It's funny to people who understand what developing is, because seg fault is usually something that happens when you deal with memory corruption. So that happens a lot with language that you have to compile. So think like C, C++, think like things like Golang. Python is an interpreted language, meaning like as you're running Python, you don't have to compile it. It's already
Mm.
compiled. Like you just run it. So to get segfault, which is a memory issue, it's laughable because it's already compiled. What more do you need? And so hey, even having that issue was funny. But yeah, man, bringing up old memories. Colt did win that contest. He got the free nitro. Um, and then eventually Colt and I ended up just doing some bounties together. I think there was one specific bounty I think Colt was on where I was on with another guy. His name slips my mind, but he's the
Spear Day?
only no, is the guy with the only role that's like the black hacker.
Oh
The
yes, I
only
remember him.
him. It was him and I, and I think it was you, and we found cross-site request forgery and chained it with cross-site scripting on Stanford University. And that was one of the first live bugs that I got. All the other bugs haven't wasn't live, but that was the first bug I got that was like live and VC kind of
Oh,
thing.
and I remember on the email service that was, I believe it
Yep.
was an email service, the mail service. But I already kind of knew about that one because if you just query for the admin mail group, you just denial of service the thing by accident. And I
Yeah.
didn't. I was trying to test what version it was, and I accidentally did that, and it was down for like 2 minutes. And then
Dang.
it went back up.
And for
Oh
those
my
who
God.
aren't aware, CSRF and cross-site scripting. So those are two different attacks. CSRF stands for cross-site request forgery. What that basically is you can mimic almost like the details of a website. You send that copied, we'll say HTML page over to your victim, so you can just email it over. If they click on it, let's say you want them to enter their password. They click on it, it'll say, "Hey, enter your password to reset your password." They enter their password, and what happens is, uh, it will send information over to you, but also forward that information back to the legitimate website. So from the user's perspective, they don't know that they've just been hacked. It just sends them back to the website and they can log in as normal.
Mm.
That's an example of CSRF. And cross-site scripting is a little more complex, but it's a way to inject JavaScript code in the web browser. Um, in this case, it was client-sided. So basically saying that if a user were to receive this link, then that script would execute if they open that link. A lot said there, but and in a nutshell, that's what we're talking about. Okay,
Jeez.
I've talked a lot. I want to pivot to uh, the story. So you guys
This
have heard
stuff.
about Code. You guys have heard about how he found Hack's network, how he got integrated. You know that once he got into Hack's network, he's responsible for so many people that are there right now. He's been a big asset. He's actually a moderator in the server now too.
That
Um,
always happens. I don't know how it
yeah,
happens, but I
it's
I have an antidote for people running their own communities. If they ask for a moderator, don't give them it. People, I have never been asked, I never asked for any moderator, any group I've ever been in, because, sometimes I become a little bit, distant, and you can't really do that in a community. And eventually, what happens is one guy, I'm going to kind of like what you see on Reddit, gets into a lot of them, and that person can wreck a lot of things. So yeah, that's how I became moderator. I didn't even ask for it.
yeah,
Dude.
yeah. I think it was a no-brainer after some time. I mean, you were not only inviting people, I saw you like coaching people, you jump in
Hmm.
VC, you're sharing your it's to the point where even if you're stumped on something, you're able to like figure out the issue by thinking out loud, and because you're thinking out loud, it's easy for us to understand and figure out what's going on. So I was like, this guy's he's a lot different
Yeah,
from the average IT guy, and there's something about him that like screams genius.
yeah,
So
no,
it was a no-brainer
definitely.
to like moderate.
Over that
But in
summer,
that
actually, that same summer, um, Cote would stay up with me till like 3 a.m. just going over Hack the Box and walking me through it. And he never got frustrated. Like I would do the most dumbest mistakes, and Cote would just like, "Good job! Like you actually like followed through this time. Like you knew to go to root this time." I was like, "Okay, Cote, there's no need. You don't have to pat me on the back, you know."
No, it's just enough too many times. Like again, this just gonna leave him unnamed because I didn't have his permission to say his name. But the guy who does C++, plus plus, his thing he did was just uh, you know, mistake. That's kind of like I learned all of like however I did things was just kind of straight from him.
Mhm.
And the thing people do is be afraid of their mistakes, and that goes into a thought loop about, well, they start looking at their current path where they're at, then in the future after they learn about that mistake. I've like having daily run Linux, you run into so many issues that it's not like a mistake is your problem, it's just how it is.
Yeah.
Yep,
uh, and
yep,
that
and
mindset is the only.
that's
Sorry.
important, especially for people getting into IT. You learn very well if you embrace your mistakes and
Hmm.
seek to learn from those mistakes. That is a great transition into the question I want to ask you, Code, and that's how did you get into IT? Right. So you're seen as like um, this really well you're seen as like a grandmaster on almost in my server, and to the point where you know a lot about technology. If you don't know something, you will learn it in VC so people can see you
Hmm.
learning it. And you're not afraid to learn it. But what we don't know is how did that start? How did you get into all of it?
So originally when I was in school, I was actually more into like airplanes. Like I wanted to be a pilot. And well, things didn't turn out. I kind of bounced around schools a lot. So, think life happens. But as I got older, I started to get into more computers. I remember getting into the developer mode on a Chromebook just to run top. Like, look at me. Like I'm in a terminal, randomly opening up CMD, stuff like that. And I remember like an old trick looking back, what the trick was bypass, I believe, the proxy for the school filtering. But back then, HTTPS wasn't fully around yet. So if you just typed HTTPS, you got around. So that was funny back in the day. That was like a trick
I
that
remember that in
some,
high school.
but you know, whatever it was, eventually my dad got me a Raspberry Pi 2 when I was, I believe, 17 for my Christmas. Um, and that, mind you, I was in like, couldn't have like a normal computer because I was like, actually, I wasn't like, living with them. I don't want to go into my like the, the like my Joker story about,
My Joker's.
yeah, about how they, because of the 2008, they said, neglect and all that was none of that was true. But anyways, like I'm living in a foster home, can't really have electronics, but they did it like after my parents talked that I got like something like that. I got a computer, but it wasn't a computer, it was a Raspberry Pi. And it did have noobs on it, which was the bootloader that you load, I believe, different operating systems for the device. But at the time it was in like light mode. So what light mode was just the TUI, and it had a default password. But without an internet connection, I had to like really look at this device. Like I'm not joking. I did not have a internet connection to use this. So I had to constantly boot it up, try to figure that out. And eventually I got eventually I don't know if my dad told me or whatever. I got into that, but that was really boring. So eventually, after booting enough times, I noticed I could just hold shift and get into the GUI. Now, once I got out, they emancipated me out of foster care. After going to, I believe they just had me do some basic job fairs, school career. It was like a kind of like a camp or whatever. So I did that. I get out. Eventually, believe, I think May or April, I got a laptop. It was an older laptop, but I ran Windows on that for like, I think it's half a year until I realized this thing is so slow. My dad has been binging these content. Like it was like how to become a hacker 12-hour video. And he sent me that video, and I believe in retrospect, it may have been a Udemy course stolen. It sounds a lot like this guy named Hackersploit. I believe it was a video that may have been stolen from him. So sorry if you
Sorry.
did make a Udemy course, but I'm going to say at the same time, thank you, because I watched it on YouTube and everything changed from that point. I did not run Windows. I ran, I believe, dual boot, or this is a very far back. So I remember dual boot or for a while, Windows would break it. So
Yep.
then I was just running Kali. Like, and back then it really did kind of just work. At the same time, there was still a lot of issues with the installer. You need it every now and then, the firmware or whatever when it load. Uh, Again, this is a noob who's trying to recall, what, you know. So hold on, let me just take one.
No, you're good. Like this
Yeah, no,
is
you're
Kali
good. And
before it was easy to install, right? You had to
Oh,
run
yeah,
Kali was
anything.
kind of easy then,
Uh-huh.
and
but there were small errors, like
Sorry.
for
the
those who
firmware.
and for those who don't know what dual boot is, actually, it's funny, Code. I actually started with dual booting as well. It is when you install two operating systems on your computer. So when you boot your computer up, you have a choice to select between the two.
Which one?
So mine was Windows and Linux, but my friend chose Mac and Linux, and that was just very common back then. And
Mhm.
before virtual machines were common, dual booting was the
It's
go-to.
common.
Sorry to jump in there, Cote, but
Uh,
it's a very relatable thing that you started with.
no, you bought me time to think. So basically, I ran Kali for a while, but eventually I think I installed Ubuntu, and AI was actually like not even a thing to people talk about. But one of the first big things I did was try to get DeepMind or whatever it was that generated those weird images. That was trying to like recognize stuff, and so that was I tried to get that running on my CPU. It barely worked, of course. So you know, so that's just something I could say I was into AI before AI
Yeah,
was
of
in
course.
everyone's head. That would have been around 2019, but by 2019, I believe I had stopped running Kali. I was running, uh, yeah, it was probably Ubuntu, but at some point I started trying other distros. So been Antergos. Antergos is no longer around. It's like Endeavor OS or Nix, no, Arco, which I actually still use to this day to build very simple VMs for bug bounty because I can make an ISO, an installable ISO with their scripting,
Mhm.
and it's very simple. But yeah, so I installed Black Arch. I'm on a lot of forums, and these forums are kind of like seedy. They're not doing the best kind of thing. So, but through those forums, I kind of start to how to find like how to Google things. Like that was like the first skill I learned, how to Google things.
Mhm.
Um, so wait a minute, I was talking about going from Linux, but that's 2019 is about the same time. Um, Things are kind of going wild in the news at the time. I was in some of the forum, if you know, like where Epstein's the one person, a part of the quote unquote medical team, 30 minutes before the world knew was being talked about there. So if you
The early
know,
scoop.
yeah, if you know where to find that early scoop, then you know what the place I'm talking about. I'm just gonna leave it unnamed. Um, Stuff like crazy stuff like that would happen, and eventually I'm like, I want to be part of those early scoopers. So I start like really going to this place called Raid Forums, looking at trying to do, you know, now this all ties in because like I did download some of those datasets, but like a lot of them were just me eventually. I didn't even really use them because I was so noobish. Like I didn't even know what to really do with them. Didn't have any of those tools that they would use to test the combos. But what I was doing was writing these scripts to collect, like to sort the data, like just
Hmm.
sort all that data. Like I have written actually three different tools, three like iterations of a tool.
Hmm.
The last one's currently up, but each time I was actually like I was running these services, and this is how I kind of learned like Linux, like Bash scripting was just learning Z and awk, because a lot of these are very poorly formatted. Like you got to strip nulls, you got to strip all these random characters they inject just to break other people's tools. I think it's on purpose because if they actually hacked into it, you got the SQL file, you could just import that. And I know that now as a someone who writes code, the code is like your output could be very clean if you wanted to.
Hmm.
So from by them purposely polluting their own data, I inevitably learned how to script my own stuff. So and as I kind of I kind of use those databases more for like OSINTs actually than actually exploiting. It's just to find emails or whatever. Um, and eventually I kind of started getting into researching, I guess, current events, as one does. And then I like that's getting too far ahead because that goes into my current project.
Yeah.
Eventually the last iteration of searching tools probably will be the
Yeah.
final.
Yeah.
And
I wanted to just do a quick recap, especially on that last excerpt there. There was a lot of big tech terms, and just to break it down. So, Cote mentioned that he used Bash and then Bash is, just literally stands for Born Again Shell. It's just a like a version 2 of the original shell, which you can think of a shell being your command prompt for a Linux system. Um, and he mentioned he used awk. Awk is a text processor. So it's a text processing command. It's just used to process text. So if you want to remove special characters, you can do that with awk. Then going down, he mentions I don't know what you did mention actually. Now that I think about it.
no,
You
so
go
the
and
other
you
one
sorted
was
text. Yeah, you mentioned you sorted text, and then you mentioned that I remember what the other tech term that you used was, but if it comes back to me, I'll
I believe it was
throw it out there.
Elasticsearch or something. I used that at one point too. And that's where everything came. That's when I don't know if I said this before the podcast, but I'll say it again. There's two paths people become when they become a hacker. You either become a solution, you ask questions to find a solution, and that leads you down a path, or you realize there's not a whole lot of answers for your solution. You just have to start making. Um,
Hmm.
and that's kind of the path I went down, and that's more of a developer path than I would say. You could still like I still do hacking, but I always tend to find a like like my end goal. Let's say if I haven't found the CV, but like if I was to make a CV, there would be probably it's not going to be interesting if I didn't make a script to automate doing that. So that's what I find my interest in. Whereas someone else, um, it's a lot of Googling. You're just asking the next question.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
So I want to ask, you have well, one, your story is very interesting. I think it's really cool to see how you immediately just found a new passion in the world of hacking, but not only hacking, but developing. And having things like, being given a Raspberry Pi without internet. So you had to get dirty and figure out, what is this? How do I use it? And
Hmm.
just start learning from there. And then once you get things up and running, having to search things. The question I have is, you're it's amazing. See, to us, especially in our server, Cote is considered, as I mentioned, Cote's considered an IT whiz, like an IT genius. Um, Yet he has had the same struggle as everyone else in the IT field, and that is with the job market. Unfortunately, in cybersecurity specifically, it seems to be difficult to get a job. So I want to ask, Code, how's that going for you? And do you have any advice for people that are trying to get a job that might be in your situation where they've learned a lot about IT, but just don't have the paper, I like to say, the paper to give a job, right?
Hmm.
I would
And
say a certification is still not a guarantee. I think a certification is just possibly like an entry, like a thing you just have to do. But
Hmm.
at the same time, I believe your projects and especially that plays into is your networking, which I completely lacked. That kind of just goes into how I am as a person. Very distant on social media, like outside of Discord or Element or Matrix. I never talk. Like I learned Reddit. 1 year actually I got a award on the end of things saying you did not upvote anything, you did not downvote anything because I just didn't. It's just from being a monk, like kind of what you call a monk, yes, on the forum, not even like in real life. It was kind of like I was. It's kind of depressing looking back at it, but at the same time, that was how I got good at it. But at the same time, you need to make sure you're networking. Networking
Hmm.
is like people get into job like you could be angry at the person who used their family member to get into a job position nepotistically, but if you use networking, you're doing that same thing but for yourself. So don't have resent for that. Use that resent feeling you have to make it happen for you.
Hmm.
If you think about it that way, like
Yeah,
yeah,
some
that's
I'm really happy you mentioned that because most of the quote unquote exciting jobs that I've had been due to networking. So I had happened to know somebody who worked at the specific companies that I wanted to work at, and they just put in a good word. There are
Hmm.
also other companies that I had not worked at, but like I have some recruiters that say, "Hey, if you're ever looking for a job, just ping me. Like I have a position for you," and that's simply because I've gotten to know the recruiter,
Yeah.
just networking, general networking. Um, that's I wanted to ask this question on that note because I think it's even with school, without school, I think networking is probably the number one most important thing when it comes to any IT role. How have you been trying to overcome that shortcoming of being someone who's not used to networking to trying to pivot into someone who's networking more? What have you been doing to improve that skill?
well, it first started in learning how to even like so like I when I was saying like the pandemic, like I am literally saying I was a monk. Like I was not going outside. Eventually that turned into a fear of going outside. But I kind of got out of that over time. But eventually I just started going to Discord and started talking with you guys. And the next step is to just post, which is my current belief solution I'm gonna do, is just start posting random things I just did on the LinkedIn without a care.
Hmm.
Because a lot of people um, and I learned this especially with my recent job that I actually just left, which is just an entry level minimum wage job because that's just kind of how the market is right now. And someone like me, you have to put your nose to the grind. But in your head, you're going to put the potential losses of a thing um, far higher than they actually are because evolutionarily, you don't want to step on your losses are a lot higher back then real life today, if you're overestimating your losses versus what you have now, you are not going to take a risk in doing that. So you view that LinkedIn posting as a risk. So a lot of that is just overcoming, like an example would be like, what if I come off as cringe or something like that? You just got to do it anyways. Like LinkedIn is literal cringe. And you just got to overcome that. Like some people, I feel like that's my biggest problem with trying to do that was that even posting my Upwork thing, that was kind of like it. It felt really cringeworthy at the time, but you just got to do it.
It's so weird
Yeah.
that you say that you were like a monk because that summer when I first met you, and guys, it was literally every single day. We were jumping into voice chat. It was like me, Pap, and Cote, like jumping into voice chat, doing hack the boxes, like chatting about random stuff every day for that summer. And it's so weird that you say that you're a monk because you were really easy to talk to. You were like
Mm.
just so chill about everything, and it
Oh,
never came off cringy or awkward.
oh, the thing was that by that point I don't know if Pap remembers my early days, like my first VC. I don't like I have been in virtual calls before,
Mhm.
but these people are not talking about tech. They're talking about schizo theory, stuff like that. Current happenings, stuff like that. They're not talking about computer stuff, and we're all like-minded in that way. So just put it like that.
Yep. When I
And but even that stopped in 2019 when I started kind of falling out of they started following, they just wanted to repost random stuff they see on the internet. I was a person who wanted to dig. And eventually it got to a point where I'm just kind of saying the truth. This is how things are going to go. And it happened. And uh, they call you a doomer
Oh,
and you left.
dude.
Yeah.
And I left.
Yeah,
That's
I
Dude.
remember when the server first started and Cote was, first jumping in VC, a lot of our conversations, not just him and I, but a lot of the group conversations were like either schizo, like conspiracy theory based conversations, or it was like someone who joined VC and they're like, "Oh, while you're using terminal, you can use putty to SSH," and trying to give advice, which was like common back then. People just jump in VC and try to give their 2 cents and then leave usually.
Leave.
But
why are
but
you using Zap?
yeah, yeah. Why are you using Zap instead of Burp? Oh, Kaido just came out. Have you heard of that new reverse proxy tool? So that's how it was at first. And Goat, yeah, Goat was one of the few, along with other people who were more interested in just conversing while we kind of just worked on boxes. And so a lot of the early conversations was schizo, conspiracy theories and just it was just everyone just giving their 2 cents back and forth pretty much. And then we finally started to like phase into tech. So um, me having started this doctorate program, haven't had much time, and Colt with his new job and everything, he hasn't had much time to go in VC. But even if we, when we do jump in, right, like a lot of our conversation is 50% tech and 50% just like random events that we just
Hmm.
talk about.
Yep. Yep. My first time ever joining a server was it was a bug bounty server, and the people there were just so mean. Like I would ask them, "Oh, like how did you do this in bug bounty?" Or they just wouldn't tell me, or they're like, "Oh, I just got really drunk and I found this bug." And I was like, "Well, that doesn't really help me." So joining Hacks Network and then talking to Cote and Pap, it was like a breath of fresh air. It was definitely different. You could tell the vibes were different. They weren't afraid to help you. They weren't afraid to laugh at you if you failed and then help you out of that hole. So it was definitely a different feeling joining you guys. And like I said, that summer was it was summer to remember. And I remember, Cote, if you want to tell the story of what's the
uh,
guy's name? The big bug bunny guy when who shouted you out.
NahamSec. Yeah, that was Naham.
NahamSec.
And I'm
And then on
man,
the Twitter.
I jumped in this. I wasn't in this office. I was in my old place, but I jumped when I saw that. I think I mentioned I was at work and I checked Discord and I see like I see like the notification and the Homsec's like shout out to Code for live streaming a bug bounty hunt and like having audience watch, and I'm just like, let's
I
go.
believe it was Toyota.
Yeah.
Let's tell you.
Wait, like, oh man, you guys don't understand how like when I first met Coheven, he told me that he was trying to work on like being more social, and then going from that to what has it been like 2 years since that server's been up? 2 years later, like getting shouted out for hosting a live stream, it's like it's a
Crazy.
wild progress.
I remember the Twitter picture. It had it code it had your old profile picture with the like the raging meme guy.
I think it was, yeah, I think it was Wojak.
And on Twitter it's the little raging Wojak guy. And I was like, oh look, there's Coates' picture. Just live streaming away his little Emacs. I was like, way to go. His little Emacs, dude.
Yeah,
I think that's what
Emacs.
attracted to a lot of people was watching Code just navigate his own tile manager. Just
See, people will like I like when I say I like to build things, like I have configured my editor to automate a lot of the documentation process for red teaming.
mhm,
There is like within my window manager, I have set up a key binding that can capture a text. So a lot of people have this issue where they're taking notes. They were like, okay, I remember to write that down. You cannot rely on your memory, which is it's faulty. It's not going to
mhm,
perfectly remember. So I got to a point of documenting things. Eventually, I got into Emacs specifically because of org mode.
mhm.
And org mode is this uh, markdown, which is like a way of like if you know like HTML, like how it looks on the web page, you're making a text document that can be rendered in that manner. So I got into
Okay.
that whole thing. Eventually, I learned this thing called Lisp, and that's a rabbit hole all in it. That's another rabbit hole. Eventually, I configured my whole editor into this thing called hack mode, and um, I have actually written a reverse shell listener in Emacs. So your Emacs, your text editor, I have done a hack the box machines all the way from a text document, and the text document is just running. It's like a notebook, a code notebook like Jupyter, or if you use Google Code, it's like that. So I did all of my hacking from that thing, and actually I still do a lot of my hacking specifically from org mode because the output is copy pasted into your document,
Mhm.
and it's crazy to see some of these, like I believe Lua or was it JavaScript? I don't remember which one got another code editor kernel. Uh, but yeah, that editor is
Dang.
crazy. And people will ask me, why do you use Emacs? And every single time I say it's because I can configure it, and
Yeah,
I can extract every part.
Emacs is a very complex text editor, but it's more than just a text editor, right? So it's like an application framework. So I remember, I remember when I first saw Cote using Emacs and I asked him why you use Emacs and he's like, oh, it can do much more than text editing. I think he like showed me like a basic Snake game or something on it. Just like you can play Snake on it or something like that. And so,
No, it might have been
uh,
Towers of Hanoi.
yeah, there was some game you had like showed me and I'm just like, okay, well that's probably why you use Emacs because it's a lot more than just a text editor. Like I'm someone who just uses Vim pretty much for everything. VI, Vim, or less depending on what's installed. But Cote has inspired me to take a look at Emacs, so I have looked at it on Windows and haven't whipped it out in
No,
a live stream yet because I don't want to look like a dweeb yet. But when I get more familiar with it, I probably
if
will.
you use Vim, I recommend Doom, and Doom on WSL because vanilla Emacs is a. I still have yet to actually convert mine over, and that's mostly because I have learned enough about Emacs to realize that I would have been one of the people who have their own configuration moved to Doom, simply because it's modular. But mine is actually less in Doom style. It's kind of like my own thing. And I'm always
Dang.
adding things that they add in and break mine thing because they add their config. They kind of like they did their thing. Like
That's
Dervish, like they've had multiple times where I have added something, and then a few like later they add it to the main defaults, well, not the main defaults, but to the like the config, and
mm.
it breaks everything I do.
Yeah.
So
It
that's a
was Cote
reason why
who's
you don't use Framework.
it was Cote who inspired me to take notes actually, doing during the hack the boxes, and he's like, "Oh, try Obsidian." I was like, "Obsidian? What is Obsidian?" So he's like, "All right, here's what you do." And he's like telling me the command to get it downloaded, and I'm running the command. I'm like, "Okay, this is actually really cool." So that's how I started taking notes, was because of Cote. And then in school, I started using it for my college ca classes, and I started learning like the commands. So I'm like in school, just I was like, I feel like Cote right now, just hacking away, just taking notes on my Obsidian.
Yeah, that's another thing I liked about Code. So I was also a big fan of taking notes. I started out taking my notes on, I don't even remember. I don't even know where I think I started my notes on like, I think it was like Visual Code or something. I don't even remember where I started. I don't remember where I started. And then, I switched over to just using Vim and then I switched over to Cherry Tree later. But, um, and by the way, we're saying all these really quick. We're saying all these tools, Vim, VILS, Emacs. We're saying Doom. These are all text editors. So we're taking notes. We're writing code. We're doing a lot of things on this. It is just like every single one of them are just text editors with different features in it. That's
Mhm.
pretty much it. Um, but when I saw Emacs, I was curious about Emacs a bit, and so more so because so I was using like tmux to create different terminal sessions,
Mhm.
and then in those tmux sessions I was using like Vim, and then even then I some in some cases I was like switching over to like my cherry tree, for example, and then Cote's like doing everything all in one window. So that that like kind of inspired me to take a look at some other options where I'm like, I'm not having three different screens up at once and trying to do three different things where I can centralize a lot of that.
Mhm.
So that was another thing that interested me that I saw Cote doing.
Yeah, Emacs, I can go into the history. It's a 40, I believe it's a 40-year-old text editor. And unfortunately, my biggest gripe with it is once I learned enough about programming, I've seen a lot of issues with the Emacs Lisp. And I'm kind of hoping that this thing called Common Lisp, which is a another language, but it's actually like what I'm going to call an industrial Lisp, and you could build actual things with it. And I'm currently building a meta search engine or a framework. Actually, it's more think of it more like a framework to build a. So in OSINT, you have like these information sources, and a lot of that is just coming from APIs. And I don't like just pulling from an API because I have been in this game long enough to see eight data sources come and go. Back in the day, I had a little Selenium scraper to go scrape have a been pwned. They used to have their service for free, then it became $3, and now now certain information isn't ever going to always be up there. That data source became unreliable, and a lot of data sources are like that. So eventually, you have to start becoming your own data source, and so yeah, I wrote that. A lot of that was in Python and NIM as I progressed. And then as I progressed, a lot of it became more into Common Lisp. And there's an editor written in that language that I built this thing in. And I could actually use my same code, my same web client inside my text editor. And I have a hope that that thing develops because a lot of people have these days these tools that are everywhere. And you can't really have everything all in one interface. You still need a thing, but the way this style of computation is that it's in an image and you can interactively run your code, or let's say. I think that style is more better than having a bunch of tools, already written very hard. You have to go pull down from source, patch your changes in. You know, if all you do is your tool just runs Lua, I am 100% happy that's what it does because now I can do anything I want. And I wish more tools did that. Every single tool I've written so far, there's a flag, there's a switch, there's a variable that just loads up another list file. And yeah, that could be insecure. So, but you could just set it read only, and there you go. You're good. You can't write to it, or you could just disable it. It could be a disabled thing, you know. And I find so much extensibility in that.
Yeah, yeah. And Lisp is so everyone who knows Code knows him for two things: Emacs and Lisp. Um, but I say that funny enough, I say that almost as a joke, but just knowing Lisp has interestingly came back full circle for me, right? So when I first saw Code whipping out Lisp, I think it's funny because he shared his screen, he starts hacking away at Lisp. I'm very adept to reading programming languages, so for me, it's like reading a book, right? If someone shares a piece of language, I can just skim through it. I know exactly what's happening. I know what variables doing what. That's just how my brain is programmed. Um, when it came to lists, I knew nothing. So so I would look at what Code's doing, and I'm like, I have no idea what's happening. And funny enough, uh, I was a few months ago. Well, this was actually probably about a month ago, maybe 2 months ago. So it wasn't that long actually. I was working on writing a new rule for a web application firewall owned by Imperva. So Imperva WAF. And to write custom rules in Imperva, they give you this strange syntax. So I take a look at the syntax document, and what do you know? It's Lisp syntax. So, so I end up going back to Cote and basically saying I tried to ignore Lisp for 40 years because nobody uses that language. And sure enough, this one WAF company decides to use that syntax, not the language, but just the syntax to write their custom rules. So I ended up going to the Lisp website and trying to learn just a little bit of Lisp, and that's where I pretty much got humbled because it's not intuitive as you think. It's not like Python where they're like, this is a variable, this is this. Lisp is more of like, you figure it out as you go. and you learn as you go. By the way, here's starting code to get you started. So that
Oh,
means that code had to figure it out and learn as he went. There wasn't like a formal documentation to guide him through the entire
and
like Lisp journey. So I found that
saying
even going through that was like, wow. So this guy, he didn't have a crutch. He just had to jump in the same way he jumped into his Raspberry Pi.
which is actually how I learned everything else. There's this big grand concept I'm learning about. I go research that big grand concept. It was first, how do I do Python? That was actually the first actual language I guess I learned. The first one was Bash, then it was Python. And then I believe after that it would have been Nim. Nim was the next one. And then Lisp. And as I started learning like DSA, data structure algorithms, stack, uh, hash map, Q, uh, LRU, least recently used. That's like stuff like that. Algorithms like recursion, breadth first, depth first, stuff like that. And eventually, I got to this idea of what we're going to call an expert machine or an expert system. And this is early AI stuff, and that's what Lisp like actually gave me was a history of like how we got to computing today. Um, AI was actually kind of like an interest in my back of my head, but like not a main focus ever. But Lisp has this way of like directly, like when you're writing it and you learn to see past the parentheses, you actually are describing your problem in its own like best fit way. In Python, you want to do this, but you have to do it in its Python way. You have to do it in its Go way. When you remove the extra syntax, there's like no syntax in Lisp. There's very little.
Mhm.
You are just writing your own stuff. So like the dog, or it could be like an example for my own project would be um, you could hold on. I don't actually. I think I should avoid. I don't want to get too deep into it. So you could describe your problems very well, and I wanted to create this thing using logic theory. This is how expert systems kind of work. They work on a lot of predicates, which is like if true, do this, or no, that would be a rule. That's a relation. You use facts, and then you use rules, which is relation between facts, and using that, you could theoretically make decisions. So I thought just a little bit of Lisp and Prolog, which is an even older, it's like just as old as Lisp, but is actually exponentially more dead than Lisp. Um, I thought I could create a system that could take a CVE and then go hack a machine. Like a variable, a fact could be system is online, system has network access, system has port 22 SSH, and an exploit could have require port 22 SSH, um, require online. And if you meet all those conditions, um, and the way that these two languages, Prolog and Lisp, ruled is that you could write those facts just as like like a YAML file, it's configuration. You could write code in such a way that it looks like a configuration. So I tried it and it was kind of dumb. It never worked. It was impossible for it to ever work, but and that's kind of how I like every single technology I learned. I so hype it up every single time, then I get disappointed.
It's-
Like even with Lisp, it disappoints me with especially with the asynchronous programming support. Everyone's like, look at my grand macro, and it doesn't really do what it needs to do.
yeah.
Oh yeah, that's the development process. That's like, it's funny because at work, my work GitHub has is full of a lot of working tools, and that's because when something breaks, I can always reach out to a dev and say, "Hey, help me do this." My personal GitHub is full of a lot of broken tools. So, and that's just how it is. I leave it up there. Some tools I really don't care to fix. It was more of just learning. Some
Mhm.
tools I actually am going to go back to later and fix. But um, Scott mentioned like spot on. A lot of the times you're just breaking. I mean, you have this great idea. You start developing it, and you're like, this is not a good idea
It's
at
not
all.
working.
But you learned a lot throughout the process. So then you just kind of move on from there.
And
Uh,
that's the process of learning.
That's the process.
yep.
Is
Exactly.
eventually you learn that this is a dumb idea, and you actually like in my own head, like recently, I thought I was gonna make, I thought, I was going to do the grand change to this object model that I've created. I was going to go away from inheritance, which is like parent-child stuff. Like you have the same kind of things as your parent, okay? To this other way where you kind of like think of composition like you're building a car, it has a tire. And yeah, I probably should have done that from the start, but what I've learned over the time is every single time I make a change like that, I didn't foresee the consequences and I undo my change. And that's what learning is like. You eventually learn what not to do, why is it like that? And you can go back in your head and be like, yeah, that's why. And it's hard to you won't know when you learn something until you reach a point where you actually test yourself. Like I thought I wasn't ready for any bug bounty, and I haven't actually got paid yet, but I have came very close. And a lot of me not get paid yet is just putting in the effort and continuously hacking. I have a lot of wandering interests and a lot of unfinished projects, so I tend to just go back to my projects eventually. But I found an old bug, but was patched by having a squid proxy, block 127. And it was very good in how it did it. I believe even DNS rebinding didn't work. So it was through a PDF, WHTML to PDF. And that tool takes a HTML file and it also apparently accepts XML, which is how I was actually testing the SSRF was through XML. I tried through a remote data DTD file or a data type file or whatever, I forget. XML is terrible. It's overly complicated. Actually, strangely, XML has a strange tie into everything else I learned with artificial intelligence called the semantic web, and everything ties into itself. But actually, uh, that bug was only stopped because someone else have did a very similar bug. And once you once I did that, I'm like, I actually know SSRF. I've done it on a Hack the Box, and then I did it like on Hack the Box when I did it in under a minute when I saw the admin panel. It was like um it said enter you. I just immediately grasped that concept, but then the real world, it's you can immediately grasp the concept. Like I did it, I found and understood it in under 30 minutes what was happening, but actually getting something to work is actually a series of hypotheses. It's a scientific process. NahamSec said it, or it may not have been NahamSec. It might have been IPSec. No, it was IPSec actually. In one of his, I think it was a tips video. It may have been something like that, but he's saying small payloads every single time, and you're asking one question. And eventually, I learned that I was not going to be able to exploit it. So I moved on. But that was the closest to an exploit. It was crazy
Yeah.
what was possible.
Yeah, I remember that. I even know the exact bounty that we were on. I think we started that bounty together, and I think I pivoted to an old bounty and picked it back up, and then put this one on hold. But Cote had found an endpoint that he thought was interesting, and I was like, "Oh, that's good. Like, keep at that endpoint." I kind of moved on to, I think I had moved on to Starbucks at that time, and then got a few bounties there, and then Cote gets back a couple weeks later, and he's like, I found like a file upload vulnerability, and I'm like, whoa, like you're still on that one endpoint 2 weeks later. And so at that point, I kind of figured, okay, well, at this point, Colt knows a lot about this one endpoint. He's been working on it for like 2 weeks, but it just shows the dedication like that, right? So my confidence in, not that he's working, he doesn't have much time, but my confidence for him to find a bug was just really high because that's what the big guys are doing. They're spending a significant amount of time on each endpoint,
Mhm.
and learning everything about the endpoint, down to the point where he even mentioned, like, the patch was applying squid proxy. How are you going to figure that
Yeah,
out without spending time on the endpoint? So things like that is what it really takes to be one of the, some of the, I would say, most creative hackers. Just taking as much time as possible, spending it. I
it didn't
wanted to ask,
happen. Oh, I was sorry.
yeah, no, no, no. I wanted to ask, with getting into cybersecurity. So I get a question a lot by a lot of people, and this is on various platforms. And that's usually, I want to get into security, cybersecurity, or I want to get into hacking, which a lot of people say. And they say, I don't know where to start. Where do I start? Now, I have my own opinion, but it is also really good to hear from other people as well, especially someone like you, Cote. So I wanted to hear your answer to the question of if someone wanted to get into, let's say someone wants to get into either hacking, bug bounty, developing, I guess it wouldn't matter in this case, of the three, what would you recommend them to start with, and how would you recommend them to start learning to become I would say informative as I guess intelligent as possible in these areas.
The first step, based on my own, history and based on like what I've learned from just watching random psychology stuff, um, is actually you need to get engaged. And the first step is just actually just watch a random video. And you need to eventually get to the point where you have your own theories and you got to first get engaged. You need to get yourself like, it's like kind of like getting into a different community and you got to get you introduced to this community. And the only way is to start watching a random video, just watch a video and don't worry about, well, I'm just watching videos. Or, the important part is that once you have enough by reading, watching or whatever, that you could start doing, you have a basic, now to install Linux. You could just follow along whatever they're doing, and that if eventually you just got to keep at this until you start developing your own theories about how this thing
Mhm.
works. And eventually, the grandmasters, which there are people who scare me on how skilled they are in breaking into hack the box machines in 5 minutes. Those people scare me, and they are like what like these people we all think we're like I'm insane like no there's people even more insane, and the amount of time they might be playing in teams though, and I always but still their individual skill is so much higher, and you got to internalize this thing, how much time it takes. People think about they want a gratification very quickly, but you need to
Mhm.
stretch the end goal farther out than you really think, because like what I know now versus 3 years ago is massive. Like 3 years ago, I was writing my first Flask websites, versus now having, it's the number one thing is time, and just keep doing a thing. It doesn't have to be a big grand thing all at once, because that's what like especially from like a psychology perspective, you're just trying to satisfy like an emotion. So try to internalize the fact that there's going to be a lot of time. And that's what it took me to get into bug bounty, was hearing multiple times from bug bounty reports and NahamSec, like he said, it's going to take time. Um, and that bounty was the longest I actually did on a bounty. And I actually kind of got burnt out after a while. Um, and then work started, and then work on, after enough abuse, I had to leave that place. For my own mental sanity, I started like some actual dark thoughts. So
God, no.
yeah, like some
No.
actual, yeah, that's when like I could track it on my watch, and I used to think that watch was stupid for the like I thought the stress wouldn't be real, like the stress monitoring wouldn't be real. It was actually very accurate, and I could go back in my memory when it was actually very stressful, and then go and on a graph and actually see that. Yeah, that it was bad. So,
God, no.
but how I'm getting back into it again after effectively what is like, since I would say I kind of really got burnt out at the beginning of the year, effectively, was just one step, just better each day. Is you don't have to be great in a short weeks. You just needed to do
Mhm.
a little bit. Um, so just get engaged, and then craft theory, and then formulate your own solutions. And it's hard to explain that to when you have no idea, and it's impossible for me to explain because it's like a human, kind of it's like a rite of passage, I would say, to once you've worked hard at something, you will now understand. And then the people who come in, and when you're teaching someone, a lot of the times I don't even know what's the problem sometimes.
Hmm.
So me asking you questions is like just me trying to get enough information to Google, and also Google. I actually was so socially anxious. I hardly ever ask anyone questions. And the C++ guy would never actually tell me how to do something. So the number of times someone asked me, how do I do this in Python? I never really actually told them, is because I never really learned how to teach someone that. So, and all the computer stuff, everything's free now, and
Yeah.
that's like a big motivator for me. Is like, um, you can just find this stuff, and that's how I learned. I actually like legitimately like people's like, well, it's just it's more like of motivation, and learning your own psychology is like very important. And I've taken a big like this past years, there's been a big step in learning how like my brain actually works. Like a lot of like it's simple as you framing, I want to do this, but if you frame, if you actually say, if you actually think about the thought in two different ways, your brain has like physiological weights attached to what potential gains and losses. Like like when I said two times, that's actually like from an actual study where they did that. And just the recent amount of days, I have actually been more motivated than ever. So I would say psychology is very important. Your own psychology. Work on it.
Oh
So
yeah.
sorry. I don't want to pepper you with questions, Cote. So, but one question I get asked a lot, especially around college campus and other cyber students, is, do I need to learn programming to get into cyber? How important is it to understand Python and Lisp and all these other coding languages and text editors that you guys use? What do you say to those kids who
I
want to get
would
into
say
cyber but don't know how to do programming?
I would say it's important to have at least a working understanding of how to program. And
Hmm.
that is actual from actual experience. Because when I was started, the new wave of YouTubers would have been Nullby, HackFi. Oh, HackFi's been around forever, but like their new wave of content. Because I'm kind of getting older and I've seen enough waves of content through YouTube. And the current wave back then was just you can learn these hacking by learning these tools. And then
Hmm.
Hackersploit was always more about methodology. I think it was more about methodology, but methodology was very lax. So, but another thing that's actually very lax um, is the programming part still. I still see a lot of people not like, I would say um, you, you really won't learn, like if you can just by running the tool, eventually you'll by osmosis, but it doesn't really make sense until um like especially in a programming sense when I tell you guys like I am visualizing the function inputs. Like there's like you a lot of it of hacking is just put in the input and it's an output, and that's all programming is. Like an example would be in Flask, your headers are being passed around and you can change them. Whereas from an outsider's perspective, you're just seeing everything that's there. You're not understanding what it's actually looking for, and what it cares about. And you don't have as much of a context as someone who at least understands headers, like what it's looking like. If you change, for example, the content type, if you didn't know understand that, you might not actually know that for some some frameworks, they might actually change the behavior based on the content type. Like an example, it might trying to start parse JSON for whatever automatically, or XML it might treat it as an XML file when it's and you could might its behavior of parsing that might not be secure. But not maybe not these days. These days is actually secure, and anyone coming into hacking these days are going to be like mad hackers because everything is just more secure than from when I first started. And I've
Hmm.
seen a change, and it's only been like maybe 5, 6 years
Crazy
from
lockdown.
beginner to where I'm at now, and it does feel locked down.
Oh yeah. Sorry, you had a question, Pep? I didn't mean to cut you
Mm,
off.
No, no, just validating pretty much everything Coach said, right? From the beginning of just watching videos to um even what he's saying now, right? Like cybersecurity is evolving. Although you probably shouldn't go and learn every language out there because that'll take a
Oh,
lifetime. It is it is valuable to learn the most commonly used ones, right? So if I just Google commonly used languages, you'll see things like Golang, Python, C. You'll see Java, although
I recommend Java.
some people will try to migrate from Java. I started learning Java. That was my first language. I
I have
find it
to
to be
learn it.
helpful. But I think the big thing Code hit on is so learning the videos to understand it, but also the psychology part of it, right? The mental health piece. I remember when I first started in 2017. So I started IT before that, but when I switched over to cybersecurity in 2017, my first video was also IPSec, like as Cote mentioned. I had gotten into Hack the Box by using their, you have to send an invite link to yourself and get in. The first challenge I did was like a Caesar cipher challenge. You just have to decipher Caesar cipher. It was relatively easy. The second thing I did challenge, which was my first box, was popcorn, and I had no idea what I was doing. So I popped open an IPSec video, and he's like, "All right, we have file upload. Now we just need to, create a PHP reverse shell." And I'm like, what is a PHP reverse shell, right? So, um, then it's like, okay, well, I see that he wrote it up himself, I think, in that video, where we have generators now. But the point I was getting with that, and I don't even need to finish the whole story. I needed to learn what PHP was and how it worked, at least because it was at that time it was very common in web applications, websites. It was very common for them to have PHP, and if I didn't know what PHP was, there was no way I would stand a chance against like a PHP website. So things like that, and then the other part, if you're in the server, you probably see me hopping on gaming every now and then. So gaming is my scapegoat, or my escape from the burnout phase, right? So I work in cybersecurity. I am in a doctorate, so I'm naturally in school for cybersecurity. Outside of that, when I'm chilling with my kids or so, they're running around. I'm sitting in a chair reading a book about cybersecurity. So at the end of the day, in order to prevent myself from burning out, I play video games.
Yep.
I mean, there are different things that people do, but you know, full circle, everything that Cote said, 100% validated. Like I have not only gone through those things, but some of them are currently going through them, especially with learning new things.
I would say programming languages, you don't have to learn many of them, and especially like if you're just trying to become a hacker, definitely not. But for like, I kind of got an interest in the programming as I learned hacking. I grew more into that. So, but I would say, um, if you ever do find yourself making automation, one esoteric language will completely change how you think about all the other languages. Um, like for me, like an example of me would be these people like how our droppers keep getting flagged. I'm like, my solution is, how about we use this completely obscure thing, somehow get it bootstrapped working, and let's just use Forth and drop the bare minimum number of tooling with it, and then you can just dynamically interpret, and your assembly has a compiler with it, so your code has a compiler, your dropper has a compiler now. Now you don't have to worry about stupid signatures. Now your thing is worried about what are you doing and just trying to avoid tripping it up. Again, I'm not much in the malware, so my solution might be really dumb, and people have said that with the C stuff, but again, I always kind of come from left. Like my whole journey has been from left field with every tooling or solution I've chosen. Um,
This is how it is
so
in the server. Literally, when I first joined, it was like Pap and Cote just like going at it like the scene in Harry Potter, like where they're like shooting the wand beams. Like that's how it's been. And I jump in like, what are you guys talking about? And eventually Pap gets tired and goes to bed. So it's just me and Cote. And then he starts going on about some random. I'm like, Cote, you gotta go back to the beginning, buddy. I don't know what you're talking about. Like everything he just said right there, I'm like, Pap and Cote,
yep,
help
I'm
me.
unlinear. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like this, if
Yeah,
you
it's
want to
like
join the server and listen to this, please do. It's just
we're like dawn and dusk, right? Like we'll both screen share at the same time. I screen share Windows, he'll screen share like
I
we're using like Arch.
think it's Nick's now, right?
He's
Arch,
using
I use NixOS for the host.
Hmm.
And that is a whole, like, how I became to that actually comes from Arch, from Arco, where you built your ISO. I like that idea. And that evolved into, I want to have a single file completely replicate my system multiple times. And that doesn't really work well when you're trying to hack. That's a very rigid and locked down thing. Like just to get Zoom working, Nix helped me because it was like I could just install it temporarily. But to get this podcast going, but Arch is actually like normal Linux is like just perfectly capable, and I recommend it over Nix. I've learned like me and NixOS is like a old C++ developer who's used it enough, and I'm not a C++ developer, but my friend, he has expressed numerous times his issues with various distributions like Ultimate plus plus in the random stupid decisions. Like instead of using iNotify or I think it was iNotify to like send updates, he was like literally running LS every 100 milliseconds or whatever.
Yeah. They're just like whenever I'm on VC, it reminds me of there was like a video I saw on LinkedIn. It was like the average bug bounty hunter versus the average like reverse engineer professional. And the bug bounty hunter is like, on Windows, like having some water, bumping to some music, just clicking a button to run his scripts. And the other reverse engineer guy is like hacking away, like typing, like sweating and like serious mode. And I'm like when you're on VC with Cote, he's typing and hacking away. And then I'm over here like on Windows, like drag and drop. Like
Running his little
like
script, right?
running my scripts, and I'm like, all right, time to chill out and watch some TV. So it's we both get the same things done, but we're just like night and day. Colt loves to get dirty, and I love to have the scripts do the dirty work for me. So,
I prefer to just make the scripts that do the dirty work,
See?
spend 4 hours doing
yeah,
that, and then I know, like you'll think I'm crazy, but there's a number of like I have enough pay commands I've created, and they every single one of them I have went without using them for a whole year, but then I suddenly need them again, and then I actually needed them again, and they actually came up useful almost every single time. Like an example would be kill SSH key, which kill just means put in the kill ring, which is like your copy paste functionality in the editor. So, like an example, like the number of times I had to copy paste my public key to get an SSH, once I got RC, like an
yep,
RCE
yep,
or
yep,
something, and the SSH or whatever is only pat is keys only. I drop it in the user directory somehow, depending on whether it depends on what stage, but at some point that gets dropped there, and or
the
just
authorized.
logging into GitHub or my Git and on a new machine that got enough tiring enough times for me just to do that.
Yeah,
I
and
wrote
what
the
what
script.
what code? Yeah, what code is talking? And it's funny you mentioned script because I actually wrote my own. I used a script. Was it yesterday, Grant? When I ran that shell script, I developed that like
Metcon?
yeah, I developed that like months ago, and I like haven't used it, and I'm just like, let me whip up dust off this old thing, and it gave me a lot of information. Like, wow, I forgot I even added that much stuff to the script. But to basically summarize what Cote was saying, right? So using SSH public keys for those who don't know, SSH is a almost like a remote connection protocol through your shell. So it's a secure shell. The way it works is it uses an asymmetric key, so public key encryption. I think for that box it was using RSA because that was like the old boxes. They all use RSA. And the way
Laughs
it
in it.
works is, yeah, the way it works is the server you want to connect to has to have your public key and you have the private key. So you can send your connection request to the server. It can verify the corresponding private key based on the message that you send with the public key that you save on the server. Once it verifies who you are, then it allows a connection to be established back and forth between the server and the client. So just a fancy way to connect to a server securely.
I do have a controversial take is that SSH passwords are dumb on a machine with full disk encryption because, and this comes from my time using cubes. My logic actually comes from cubes, the most secure, probably the most secure distro on the earth. Um, was that if you're this is just a little tidbit into that is that if you have malware running machine, it's going to get your password, and if it's full disk encrypted, you don't have to worry about your plain keys being available. So if you do use full disk encryption, I honestly do not like your file could be stolen, sure. But if there's malware already stealing your file, this is a catch 22. It could just steal your password, and it's going to.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Especially with the old, I don't know if you know the old, I think it was BitLocker, the full disk encryption. So I have this old, do I still have it?
Another book
Uh,
recommendation?
no, it's not a book, but I have this tool. I have this tool
Oh,
right here.
dang.
It's a USB 3 to SATA, and I need hard drive connector. Then I have like these hard connectors here to like think of like these old SATA connections. And so what I do is I connect them to an old like encrypted hard drive, and then connect the other end to my computer. and then I load up FTK Imager, which is a forensic toolkit imager, and then you dump the contents of that hard drive. And whether it was encrypted or not, with like an old version of BitLocker, I can still get all the files, passwords, everything in it. In the latest
Yeah,
version of BitLocker, they have fixed it now, so
Mhm.
the data will be
yeah, on
scrambled.
Lux.
But back then, it was like it doesn't matter if it was encrypted; you can just dump it in plain text.
I won't talk about my password too much, but I will say Lux 2 uses Argon 2 I D, I believe, or it's Argon 2 I. It's Argon 2. Good luck. Just seriously, good luck trying to crack that. And secondly, I actually have difficulty typing mine in at every boot. It's actually like at least two times sometimes. Um,
Yeah.
and if your keys are actually fast enough, you could type it in under 10, like an actual like fast, then it's weak. And if you're just trying to protect against criminals or whatever, I like I said at the beginning where I was kind of schizophrenic when I came into this the whole computer stuff. Not like actual schizophrenic, just conspiracy. So I've always had distrust, and I'm like, I'm gonna have it like that. And but old my SS actually we're talking about old RSA. I actually have to update my RSA actually. Just thinking,
Uh-oh.
I just looked at it. It's still RSA, not elliptic
Oh,
curve.
yep. I was about to say, yeah, SSH, they SSH and TLS migrated from RSA. So TLS is using Diffie-Hellman by default, I think, and I think SSH is using elliptic curve by default. Think, don't quote me on the SSH one, but TLS I know for sure because I know the guy who created the 1.2 implementation, and he was telling me the issues with that. Well, he helped create. It wasn't one guy who created it, but I
Part of
know
a
someone
team.
who worked. Yeah, he was part of a team that helped create it, the standard for it.
Man, what a great conversation. As usual, gentlemen.
Yeah, absolutely.
This feels
That
like another
was
one of those voice chats from back over summer.
yeah,
That's what
yeah,
it feels like.
absolutely.
I'm just
As as always, contribute to the conversation. We want to see these comments. We want to hear your thoughts. We'd love to hear, just hear what you guys think about everything. If you want to see what we mean about Cote being an actual genius, join the server. And when you see him in VC, just join a
Join.
VC, and you don't even have to say anything. If you join VC, he's most likely going to be sharing the screen. And you're probably going to learn something or two. Um, if it's not from what he's doing, it's probably going to be from what he's saying. And if you have any questions, he's always open to like answering the questions. And if you don't
um
understand, just let him know, and he will absolutely break it down. I've seen it many times, and I have even told him sometimes that you're writing a list. I have no idea what you're doing, and he'll explain it. Yeah.
Now
I
he's gonna jump around though. Like you're not gonna
I
get the
am
linear
non-linear.
story. So he'll start here and then he'll like go here and then here. And then you kind of have to go back and piece it together. That's your problem at that point.
I'm sorry. Like it is like um like no joke. Like I have said, like I am like 80, like actual 88. Like there's been a number of people, it's easy to fall into that camp where you think you're broken or whatever. I try to work around it, but I am just not linear when I think sometimes, specifically in when I'm talking, and I just can't help it. Like I tried at the beginning of this to stay linear, but eventually at some point I think I lost it.
You broke your own rule.
Code's mind works like a binary tree. It starts with like one idea, and it just keeps branching off to two different zeros and
No,
ones, and every
no,
little
it's a
branch.
no, it's a circuit. No, it's a
Just
circular.
like
It's not an acyclic graph. It's a circular graph with cycles.
So it
it's
always
cool
goes
to
back and connects
it's
back, huh?
it connects. It's cool to
It
see
connects
Pap
back the
like catch
list.
them though. Like Pap's like, oh, I follow you here and I'll follow you here, and then like they'll just it's like ding 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 like, how
Yeah.
they're talking. Like because Pap can follow it. And I'm like, I'm lost. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's I do it to an extent, so it's just me hearing what I do in my head, so it makes it a lot easy. But yeah, absolutely. Thanks for watching this episode. I mean, this episode was probably one that I was looking forward to.
The
Probably
most.
is and will be one of my favorites for a while. Like I said, Cote, he's a um important asset. I would say
Yeah,
he's
he's
more than
played a
an
big role in
asset,
my
but
life for real.
big role. He's actually the reason why the server is where it is today. A lot of the people that are in the server and are active in the server are there because of Cote. So, and a lot of like there are things that I have learned just from watching Cote that you probably won't learn in school. You won't learn. You
Hmm.
definitely won't learn with these certifications. You might get lucky if you're in the right community, but you'll definitely learn from Cote.
Yeah. I spent so much time with Code that people on the server would start like asking me questions.
Yeah,
It was
there
so
you
weird
go.
to see that because like, wait, why are you asking me? I just got here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, oh, what do you
Yeah,
think of
Before,
this? What do you think of that? I was like, oh, it's Code who told me this. I don't know.
definitely.
yeah.
I'm definitely probably going to start just recording whatever I'm working on and just kind of like let it flow naturally, or at least be in feature. I've been working on that ever since that like pretty much the day I stopped going to that job. Um, and it's not like I just quit. I actually have a bit of savings, so
So
Oh,
gonna be
that'd be
busy until I
awesome.
get something else. But
soon
while I
enough.
have the time, that's what I'm gonna be doing.
Cool.
Yeah, I will definitely watch that. And if it's on YouTube, let me know. I'll blast it on the
Blast
server.
it. Check
Um,
out, look out for Code's
and
YouTube.
yep. And last question, any last words, Code, for the greater community watching? I mean, this is a mixture of people who know IT or who are just getting started out and want to learn a little more. Any last pieces of advice?
Um, rabbit holes, definitely a few rabbit holes will never hurt. Like if you feel like you're kind of looping in on things, when you get to the very high level of things, everything loops into each other. I was about like everything loops in on each other. Like AI to even object oriented programming with this thing called frames actually has a very short relationship. And you'll be like, you might think that's crazy, but like everything loops in on each other. And do not be afraid that because there's like no direct end path that you're not making progress. Rabbit holes is like how I think everyone has learned.
Yep. You've heard it,
Words of
rabbit
wisdom.
holes. I've
Put
been
it on
down
a
a
t-shirt.
million. Yep. I've been down a really million myself, and I've learned a million times because of those rabbit holes. All right. Thanks for watching another episode, episode 6. Join the
Yep.
server. We'll link it in the description, and we will see you guys next time.
PaperTrail out.
Drill out.